from Clear Process Solutions. We're going to get started here with our March web tips just momentarily. So we will just wait maybe till 11:02 to be respectful of the time here, but give folks that may be jumping off from another meeting a moment to start. So we'll go on mute here for a minute, and we'll pick it back up around 11:02 just to give everyone a little bit of time to join us. All right, thanks. All right, looks like we've waited a couple minutes for some folks to join us on the webinar. We are here today in Findlay, Ohio, at Cooper Tires. So we have some folks in the room finally, so I'm not talking to a screen in my basement all by myself. So it's nice to see some other human faces while I'm doing this. So hopefully we'll have a little bit better success than we did last month. I don't know if it could go much worse, but you know, now that I said that, there's always the opportunity. So let's go ahead and get started. I know we have a few new people joining us today, so let's go ahead and get started with that. All right, so for web tips, if I can get my presentation working, that's always a good start. Okay, so web tips is our monthly, tips and tricks session where we spend, about an hour, a little less than an hour, going through some tips and tricks that we've learned and use and implement with our customers with the desktop tools, Transaction, Winshuttle, Central, as well as the forms and workflow piece of the pie as well. So this month is my month. We're going to do some things with Transaction and Query because a lot of our customers now are moving into the forms space. We are going to start integrating the forms component into the transaction and query tools. So we're going to see a little bit of that today. But yeah, so that's what WEBtips is about. It's really just, an opportunity for you guys to grab a couple nuggets of information to use in your day-to-day operations with Winshuttle and help improve your performance with the tool and get a little bit more value out of it. So I'm still your lovely host, Lance Yoder. Been using SAP now for 7 or 8 years. My background was, previous to this, worked for Rockwell Automation for about 10 years doing data migration, go-lives, all on the business process side. So I didn't really get into SAP configuration that much. I understand it. But my job was to make sure that the data that was in the system met the business process needs and helping manage that. So moving right along, it's hard to talk about yourself because it seems braggy. So I will just leave it at that. So for March agenda, like I said, we're going to talk about query and transaction, and we're going to start off with query integrating with SharePoint, SQL databases, and forms. And then we're going to move on to using Excel formulas in query to download to Excel, and then a couple items in transaction using if conditions to manage screen navigation, and then skip transaction if empty. So the first one we're going to talk about is using query to download the SharePoint list SQL and interacting with form dropdown. So for those of you that don't have the forms piece, you're only able to download to Excel and Access and XML forms. But when you have the foundation package, you can download to other things as well, such as SharePoint and SQL and text files. So as you work from a forms perspective, you can use SharePoint or SQL database or any other data connection really to populate that dropdown. But when you're using SAP data, it does have some challenges. So that's what this tip is going to be about, is how to best use data from SAP if you need to stage it somewhere else. If you're not doing a live lookup in SAP, how can you stage that data effectively and still have your form drop-downs look pretty? So we're going to go to an example of first just showing you how to download data into SharePoint and SQL, and then some of the issues that we run into with drop-downs. Okay, so we're going to exit the presentation here and go on to our test server. So the first one I'm going to look at is
hey, Lance?
Yes.
Lance, sorry, I'm still seeing just the first page of your presentation, so not sure which screen, if you're dual screening. I'm still seeing just the W.
Okay, are you able to see?
There we go.
There we go, okay.
Now I see SAP certified, Winshuttle query.
Okay, I had my screen paused, so thanks, Beth.
Okay.
Because I saw it, but no, I guess no one else did. So, all right, moving along to our first topic is what are the options when you're even downloading data? You know, when you have the forms capability, the first thing that we're going to look at is the opportunity to go into SQL. Okay, so a SQL destination. All right, so if you're updating your mapping, so we're not going to go into how to develop the query. This is just a one-table query. But when you look at your destinations, if you're just using the desktop tools, you have Excel, Access, and XML. But once you're on the forms level, you also have the ability to do text, SQL Server, and SharePoint list. So in this case, I'm going to download to a SQL Server. And in order to do that, you must have predefined your table. So in this case, I have my test server and then my database, L. Yoder test 1. So let's take a look at this. In this example, we're going to download MRP controller code. So if you have an idea of a form, maybe it's a material master update or material master extension process, you want to give the user the ability to select the MRP controller from a drop-down instead of typing in a value which may or may not be a valid value. So the use of drop-downs in a form is important because then you're able to limit users to selecting valid values, which is always a help. As much as you can eliminate errors of data entry, by all means, do so. So we're going to use data out of SAP, and we're going to put it in a SQL database, and then we're going to use that SQL database as our source for a drop-down. Okay, so like I said, you have to have your table set up in advance. So let's go take a look at my Microsoft server. So if I look at my table, here is my table right now. I have plant, code, and description. Okay, so this display value is something a little bit unique. When you look at the table that we're querying, which is T024D, let's go take a look at that in SAP. When you query that, I'm just going to bring up everything if it wants to participate today. All right, so we'll just look at the first 10 records to make it quick. But really the only three columns that I want to get are plant, MRP controller, and then the person's name. So in this case, we have the code sort of in there already with the name, but oftentimes what you'll see with MRP controller codes are just that you have a code and then you have a description. Most oftentimes the description does not include the code that you see on the screen because that's just not normally the process. Let's see if there's any other ones that might give a little bit of a better example. No, it looks like in this system everything already has the code in there. But if you can envision in your setup, you probably just have the code and then some description that does not have the code. So when you're doing a drop-down, you have the option to show one value to the user, but then in the background have another value. So if we wanted to display on a drop-down just the description, in this case it does have the code in it, but again yours probably doesn't. That's not very user-friendly. If the descriptions aren't. Some people might know things by descriptions, other people might know them by code. So the idea is how can we present the data and the best way to the user to do that? Well, when you're downloading to SharePoint, you don't have the ability to format. So that's why this display value option is here. So I added this column called display value, and when I created this table, I used this little statement here that says create table, And then I created this calculated column called display value, and it's a concatenation of the code. So this is going to be a concatenation of the MRP controller plus the description. So we'll see how this works here in a moment as I get through that. And I'm sort of starting with the ground up, and then eventually we'll get to the form. You can see, how this presents itself on the form. But first off, we're just going to understand how to download data to a SQL database. So I've already set up my table in SQL, mapped my columns. So I'm mapping the works down to plant, these values down to there as well. So you can see I have 4 columns in my table, but only 3 columns I'm downloading from the query. So let's go ahead and take a run at this. Because I'm using SQL, I have to identify my database, and that's sort of predefined here, and I can pick any table that I want as long as it contains those columns. And I really don't want a log column in this case because I really don't care about that information. I just want the data out of that. So I'm going to go ahead and run this real quick. Hopefully it'll, so it's validating. It's going to log me into SAP and start downloading that data. Okay, so I need to log into the database. Okay, so in a relatively quick fashion, they put about 3,000 records into the SQL database. So let's go take a look and see what we find here. Hopefully we have some information. Okay, so you can see I have the plant, the code, and the description, just like I downloaded. But then because I have this calculated column, SQL automatically put in the concatenation that I asked for. So person 1, now that's not very descriptive, but it might be easier for a user to say, okay, well, this is the code 001-person1. Now that might be more descriptive for a user to understand in a drop-down process. So using SQL, you can format the data on its way down. And as you probably know, for those of you that have the forms tool, you can use the SQL database as a data source for drop-down. So now, using SQL, you're able to do any data manipulation you might want, what I call on the way down. So as you're downloading the data, you can reformat that without any additional steps to use as your data source. So let's take a look at what that means to the form now. And let's go back to where my form is. Now if I can just find it again. Composer, Excel dropdown. All right, so here's my form. I have 3 drop-downs because we're going to look at SQL, SharePoint, downloading to SharePoint, and also downloading to Excel and then into SharePoint. So I want to pick a particular plant. Let's do a 0001. Okay, so that's my text box. I'm filtering my values based upon that. So you can see now that my drop-down is filtered on that plant, I see the valid values for that plant. So if I go back to the SQL database, I can see that for plant 0001, I have 4 options. So by using that concatenation, that calculated column, I'm able to display the value or the label of the drop-down in the manner that I want. So if I go back to the form, now we can look at that again. I'm seeing it in the format that I want. Again, if the code wasn't there, it wouldn't be super useful. So by concatenating, we're able to do that. And what I'm doing here is I'm filtering on that. So if I enter a different plant, I should see a different list of information. Okay, so again, it's that concatenation. All right, so that's the first thing. So not only understanding that you can download the data to something other than Excel and Access, SQL is a great way to do that because you can transform that data and you can schedule it. So if you want data out of SAP every day to be updated for your users in the forms, you can schedule this to be done. So every Monday, you can have it out there on the calendar to schedule it on the server, and every Monday or every day, however often you schedule, your values will just be updated in your drop-down list in your form. Okay, so that's one way to manage that. So let's take a look. We see this one here for SharePoint. Let's take a look at what SharePoint has to offer from a download perspective. So I'm going to skip over to where that SharePoint list lives. Okay, and we're going to go look at that list. somewhere in my many, many SharePoint lists. I have one called MRP controllers. And this one was created by Query. So I used Query to create this table. I did not create this list manually. I have the same query where I'm downloading the 3 columns, although when you use Query to create the SharePoint list, it gives it its own nomenclature of table underscore field description. So we have the table T024D underscore plant. That's just how Winshuttle creates the SharePoint list. And then I have this display value again. So let's take a look at what I've done with this list setup. If I look at display value here, we can see it's a calculated column. So it's a calculated column concatenating the code, a space and a dash and a space, and then the MRP controller. All right, so basically I'm trying to do the same thing I did with my SQL table. So if we look at my node again on what I did with display value with SQL, it's creating a column display value and concatenating those items together. That's the exact thing I'm trying to do here with SharePoint. But let's see how that sort of occurs using Query. All right, so we've looked at our SQL database options. So let's go ahead and open up our solution for SharePoint. And let's take a look at that. So the mapping there, you can see there is no mapping because Query is going to create the table and update the columns with this particular naming convention. So you don't really have to worry about the mapping because Winshuttle is going to do all of that. But again, I'm only downloading those 3 columns, and in SharePoint I have that 4th column. So let's go ahead and we'll kick that off. We'll just do the first, because it's going to take a while if I do 3,000. So we'll just do a certain number of entries. Let's just do the first 100, for example, or that's 1,000. So we'll go ahead and do the first 100, and we're going to put it in SharePoint. Let's make sure I'm deleting. I want to make sure I would clear the data first. If you don't clear the data first, you can just be adding the same values to the list twice. So my advanced run options here says clear result file. That means it's going to empty out that SharePoint list before reloading it with all of the information. So it looks like I have my right SharePoint list, and we're going to be good to go here. Let me make sure I'm out of my settings just in case that messes me up for any reason. Okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and run this. We'll just do the 100 records. Okay, and put in my password to SharePoint. Okay, it's writing that data to the SharePoint list. Writing to SharePoint is a little bit slower than writing to a SQL database. This is where the demonstration goes awry here when you're doing these things. So bear with us here as this finishes writing to the SharePoint list. Hopefully finishes. Okay, so let's take a look at the SharePoint list and see if it's actually writing any data to it. All right, so MRP controllers. Oh, it's first deleting everything. So you can see there's 1,500 records if I refresh. Okay, now, okay, so it's still deleting everything. So I'll go ahead and skip ahead while it's deleting. I think everyone understands it, and we'll take a look at it, how that's working. But if I'm going to filter on a SharePoint list, and I want that same kind of option. So if I want to use that display value as what I want to show the user is, if I use a calculated column in SharePoint, this is how it looks. Okay, SharePoint does this great thing by putting in the type of field it is, followed by a semicolon and a pound. So you can't really use SharePoint calculated values because that's not really display friendly. No one wants to see that string pound or number pound or calculated field, whatever that is at the beginning. It's just the field type that it is, what kind of value is in there. So you can't really use calculated values within SharePoint to do that. So again, that's why the SQL option is preferred here. All right. So in this case, SharePoint adds that a little bit. So again, that's not super user friendly by seeing all that extra stuff at the beginning. So I wouldn't use SharePoint if I wanted to manipulate the data. I would probably use SQL in that case because I can use the database to do that. Okay, so let's take a look at the last option, and it's moving into our next tip a little bit, understanding what you can do with Excel and downloading that information. So let me see. Okay, it successfully downloaded 100 records. So it took a little bit of time to delete all those existing records before it piled in those new 100 in that SharePoint list. But I think you get the idea of how that works. So let's move along to the Excel example. All right, so this is your most common use case that most people with just the desktop tools are using, just the Excel version. So let's see what the options are for here. So not only are we going to understand how to use Excel as a source of a drop-down, it's a little bit more manual. So let's say you didn't have access to SQL and you're trying to populate a form field. So if you didn't have access to a SQL database, this is another option on how to do that. It's a little bit more manual, but it's still effective to get that type of display value you want. So let's go ahead and take a look at this mapping and understand what this is doing. All right, so I still have the same table. I have my 3 columns, but now because I'm using Excel as my data destination, you can see I have all these other options over here on the right, and that's not something we've really talked about before. So even if you're not a Forms user, this is a tip for you guys if you're just using Query from the desktop to download to Excel and do reporting or data extraction. So if you were to just do your normal mapping, you wouldn't really be using these Excel expressions. But what you'd end up with is a data file. Let's see if I can find my data file somewhere now. Okay. All right. So you'd have a data file that would look like this, right? So if you're not using any of the Excel options, you're just picking your 3 columns that you want to download. This is the look you're going to get: your plant, your MRP controller, and then your description of that. So that's what you get right off the bat. But using this Excel option, I'm going to go ahead and delete all this information just to be safe for our demonstration here. But let's take a look at what these Excel options mean. Okay, so you have this option to put in an Excel expression, and then you have this expression evaluation cell, transform original mapping, and expression evaluation description. I'm going to make this a little bit wider here so we can see the whole thing at once. Okay, that looks a little bit better. All right, so if I want to do some data manipulation, I can use an Excel expression right in this column. So if I go back to my Excel file, and maybe I deleted it a little bit too early, but if we had just some values here, code 001 plus the description, again, in your drop-down value, you don't want this kind of look. You want a formula in the right column. You want a formula that you can concatenate things together. Now, there's many ways to concatenate. There's a concatenate function, or I'm just going to do a quick ampersand here to get things together. So again, this is the look that I want. So if we look back at the form, that's the look that I want. I want the code dash description. So I can do that in Excel by just having that formula there. And if you didn't use these Excel functions, you could just, you could have all of your data, and then after the end of the run, you could put in your formula and drag it on down there. Okay, so you could do that every time, put in your new formula, drag it on down, and now this is your value. But if I take the same formula, so B2 ampersand dash ampersand C2, and I copy that exact formula. So if I just highlight this, take that exact formula out, go back to my query, and I put that exact formula back in one of these Excel expression columns. It could be really any one. It doesn't really matter because it's just a formula. And then that's my Excel expression that query is going to populate my Excel field with on the way down. So as it's populating the Excel file with the raw data from SAP, it's going to be bringing that formula along and applying that with it. Now the expression evaluation cell, this is where I'm telling Winshuttle to put the results. So in my Excel file, I want the result to be in D2. Now, as you're aware, when you drag a formula down in Excel, you can see it's changing B3, B4, B5, B6. What you want to do in your Excel expression is you want to start with that first row where you're downloading your data. So if you're starting data download in row 2, you want your Excel expression to start at row 2 as well. And then Winshuttle will do that same kind of drag down operation by B3, B4, B5 as it goes along. Okay, so the expression evaluation cell is going to put that in there automatically. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. All right, so I'm going to get rid of the one. I'll just leave it at 100 so we can see the results a little bit quicker. Make sure I'm clearing my data first. So I'm clearing mapped columns. Right field expression. So you have to make sure that is checked. If it is not checked, you will not get the results that you want. All right, so we have to make sure that that option is checked. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. All right, go ahead and log into my SAP client. And it's going to get my first 100 records out of that T024D table. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. I actually put the file in a different one that I was using, but that's okay. So this is the new file I created on my desktop since I wasn't navigated to the right file. But you can see that formula has been applied for me, and it stops at the last record. So if you were to do this manually and reuse this file, if you had that formula in there manually and you didn't delete everything out, what you might have, sorry about that, what you might have is a file that has some data, but then if your formulas are still there, now you have this bit, okay? So by using manual, I have this formula that's dragging down because the next time I ran it, there were only 4 values instead of 10. So you have this leftover formula. But if you're using the Excel option within Query, it'll make sure it deletes all of that information prior to loading it. So you won't have any hanging formulas at the end of your data. Okay, so that's how the Excel expression works. If you want to have more than one, in this case, you can have up to 3. Again, it doesn't. I could have put this expression down here or down here. It really doesn't matter. You can only have as many Excel expressions as you have downloaded fields because there's just no more room. Okay, so what does transform original mapping mean? If I check this box, transform original mapping, what that'll do, and I don't think it'll allow me to check that while I have an expression cell in there. There we go. All right, so transform original mapping, what that will do is it'll take this formula and it will put it back in wherever I have this map. Okay, so in this case I have this, I'm downloading the plant value to column A. If I have this transform original mapping, it's going to concatenate columns B and C and put that value back in column A. All right, in this case that doesn't really make much sense because I don't want to overwrite my plant value with my concatenation of code and description. But the idea is that if you have a column, you just want to overwrite that. Maybe you want to format it a little bit differently to meet specific needs of your business process. You can use an Excel expression to apply that formula and then overwrite the existing value that's being mapped down. So in this case, it would overwrite the column for mapping A. So if I wanted to overwrite my description down here, so the description of my MRP controller, I would want to put that there. So if you're evaluating to a different cell, so previously I had D2, it doesn't really matter what row you have it on. But if you're using transform original mapping, you want to make sure that you're putting the Excel expression in the row or the row for the column you want to overwrite, because it's going to overwrite that. Okay, so that's just a tip that anyone can use that has query. If you want to use Excel expressions, you can do that. That saves, if you're scheduling reports to run or data extracts to run, and you want to format that, you don't have to worry about then going into manually manipulate formulas and things like that after the fact, dragging down just to the last row. Use the Excel expression options within query to do that. Okay, so how does this relate to the form? So as I said, this is the format that I want to show the user on the form. But if I don't have a SQL database available to me as a designer, I can't really do that, even though that's the best method in order to do that, because it's the quickest download. You can use the SQL code to manipulate the values for you. But if you don't have any of the options, you can use this Excel option as well. Okay, so if you have this data in Excel, you could go to your SharePoint list. I'm going to go back to my SharePoint list here, MRP Controller 2. And this is SharePoint 2010. So 2013 has a little bit of a different look, but the ideas are the same. So if I went to the list and I wanted to edit the list in data sheet view, I could select everything out of here. I select everything. I clicked around on myself and I lost it. Okay, so I could select all of these rows, delete all of the rows out of here, and then paste them back in. So you can go from Excel. I think I have it, so I'm on my desktop now. So see if I can delete all these records. Okay, and then go to my desktop here, wherever I have that Excel file. So I can take these records then. So this is where the Excel expression has been applied for me using query. I can copy that information, go into the SharePoint list, and then just paste it in there. Okay, so that's a little bit of a manual process, and it's slowly adding all those values for me. But if you don't have access to a SQL database, you can still download to Excel, have the expression applied, and then paste it into your list. So again, it's a little bit more manual, but you still get the same display options that I'm looking for when I do a drop-down. So you can see from SharePoint from Excel, it's using that list of pasted in values. I'm still getting that same bit. So overall, what did we talk about during this tip? I know it was a long-winded tip about many ways to download data, but a lot of people aren't using download to the SQL because they just don't know how it works or the value of it, especially interacting with forms. Everyone's just downloading to Excel or SharePoint lists. But if you want to format data, using SQL is a great way to do that, and it's very, very quick to respond. But on the Excel side, since everyone's using the Excel side, hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can use the Excel options to transform your data, what I call on the way down. So you don't have to apply expressions manually. You can use that Excel option. All right. So I'm going to go back to the webinar here, see if there are any questions. If you do have a question, just hit the raise your hand icon on the webinar, and we can take a minute and unmute your mic and ask a question. All right, so we will close out that question session. We'll move on to the next tip. So let's see what kind of tip I came up with next. All right, we already talked about that one. Okay, so we're going to move on to transaction and using an if condition screen navigation. So most people are familiar with if conditions. It helps you, understand when to apply this value or this other value in your mapping. But we're going to take a look at it from the perspective of using if conditions to help navigate your way through a transaction. And so why would you want to do this? Okay, I use this a lot. I use if conditions to help me navigate through an SAP T-code because I want one transaction script to be multifunctional. I don't want to have a script to do finished goods and then a different script to do raw materials and a different script to do semi-finished goods. Everyone knows that the material master by material type has different views. But let's say I don't want to have 10 different scripts to do 10 different material types. Well, I can use the if condition around my OK code. So I'm going to go ahead and load up transaction. So an OK code, for those of you that may be a little bit newer to the tool, the OK code is what Winshuttle tells SAP to do next after I'm done with that screen. So I've loaded some data to screen 1. Now that I'm done, I need to navigate to screen 5. Whatever screen is next, the OK code tells SAP, so Winshuttle is sending that OK code over to SAP to tell it how to navigate. So by putting if conditions, and I think I clicked on it. So by using if conditions around those OK codes, I can say if a particular criteria is met, go over here. But if a different criteria is met, go to this other screen. So now I can use these if conditions to help me sort of consolidate my scripts to be multifunctional instead of managing many scripts that do similar things. So in the case of 10 scripts for 10 different material types, if you add a new configuration to have a new required field, you would have to update 10 scripts to accommodate that particular field if it happened to be on maybe the basic data view or something like that. But if you have one script, then you're only updating just that one place. Now, granted, it becomes a little bit more of a complex script, but it's only one script that contains all of your business processes. So let's take a look at what this one is trying to do. All right, and let's take a look at the associated Excel file with it. Okay, and we're going to do if. All right, so in this particular case, let's go ahead and open that up. We're going to be updating a vendor. We're going to be updating 3 different fields on a vendor. We're going to be updating company code data and purchasing org data. Okay, so a common case would be, all right, payment terms. Okay, we have payment terms that exist in 2 places for a vendor. It exists in the company code level, and it exists at the purchasing org level. So if we want to update payment terms, we have to do them in 2 places. But what if a vendor doesn't have the purchasing org extension? So in this case, I have my company code payment terms, and then I have my purchasing org level payment terms. But if a certain vendor doesn't have the purchasing org functions, you wouldn't be able to use this. You wouldn't be able to use this script because it's going to try to upload that information to screens that don't exist. So that's why the if condition around your screens can help you determine when to save, when to move to the next screen, and so on. So let's take a look at the script sort of one step at a time. So we're going to go step by step through this script to see what the heck it's trying to do. So I'm going to move that out of the way. We're going to start with row 2, and we'll just go step by step to see the action. Okay, in the first example, the data that was provided in the spreadsheet had the data filled out for both the purchasing org and the company code. So hopefully we're going to see the screen update those particular items. Okay. You see anything in red is really coming from the Winshuttle script. In this particular case, I'm also updating a search term, just sort of hard-coded it to an A, so you can see we're updating information. Okay, so because I have entered payment terms at the company code level, we're going so you can see the company code has been entered, and we're doing payment terms and the payment method on that. Okay, then now we're at the purchasing org level. We're updating the terms of payment there, and then it's going to save. So because I provided all the information for the purchasing org and company code, it updated in both places. So let's take a look at the data now. We're going to be updating that same vendor just as an example. But if I only provide purchasing org data, I don't want to go to the company code screens. And in the third row here, I have company code data, but I don't have any purchasing org data. So if I didn't have any of those if conditions, it should have walked through all of those same screens, but I would have been receiving errors because I didn't provide values. So let's go step by step through these next two rows and see how it responds. and then we will take a look at the script itself and understand how that works. All right, so again, the first one is just purchasing org data, and the second one is just company code data. All right, so I still have my initial screen where I'm entering all of that information. Again, updating the search term. But now I should be going right to the purchasing org data, where before I started at the company code. So you can see now I'm at the purchasing org level, updating the payment terms there. And then it's going to save. So the previous one updated 2 screens. Now I only provided purchasing org data that updated just 1 screen. Okay, so now I'm on the next transaction where it should be updating company code data, but no purchasing org data. Okay, again, getting the search term updated. And now I'm at the company code level, entering my purchasing payment terms and payment methods, and then it's going to save. Okay, so you can see I used one script to do different types of updates. You know, in this case, I just updated the same vendor for a case of a quick example, but I think you can understand how this process of using if conditions can help you use the single script, a single template, to do many things. So instead of having 10 templates to worry about to update vendors or materials or whatever it may be, maybe it's only 5 templates, you have one. But you have to understand how that process works for that script. All right, so your users have to have that awareness as well as how to fill out the template to make sure Winshuttle is going to do what we want it to do. All right, so I'm going to go flip over to the expert mode, make this a little bigger so we can see what's going on. All right, and you can see that I have these conditions all over the place throughout my script. So let's take a look at the first condition. Okay, so it says if column D is not blank, so if column D is not blank, do this, else, so this means else. So if column D is not blank, do this, else, do this. All right, now you can see I have 2 OK codes in here. I found out what the OK code is for the screen that I want, and I've copied it back up here, and I put an if condition or an if-else condition around here. So if column D is not blank, I want it to navigate to a particular screen. So I found the OK code through my recording, and so I recorded this scenario at the top where I navigated to all the screens, and I used that recording to help me determine what OK codes get me where. All right, so I understood what my process was, grab the proper OK codes, and walk through this process. So if column D is not blank, it's going to go here. All right, so now column D is company code. So now I have my company code screen. So not only do I have to have an if condition around my OK code, I have to have an if condition around the screen to make sure that I'm only navigating to that, getting the data for that screen. So again, I have a repeat of my if condition if column D is not blank, because Winshuttle, when it does its playback, or when you're going through the upload process, it's going to read your if condition, but it's still going to continue down the script 1 row at a time. So you're telling it what screen to go to, but it's still going to continue down here. So you have to follow with an if condition around the entire screen. So you can see I have an if condition around all of the rows in that screen. So I'm telling SAP to navigate to a certain screen, and then I'm telling Winshuttle to execute those particular lines for that certain screen. So within that screen, I also have if conditions around updates. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. Right, so now it's looking at column F. If column F isn't blank, go ahead and do the next OK code. So if column F is not blank, do this, else, update. So column F is the purchasing org data. So if column F is not blank, I want to navigate to the purchasing view, which is this OK code, again, that I found through my recording. Else, if it's blank, I just want to save. So if it's blank, I'm just going to save at this point. And when you have SAP save, it exits the transaction, and anything below here is not used. So the transaction script also exits when a save happens as well in most T codes. I'll just qualify with that with most T codes, it'll exit the screen. So you just have to understand your T code a little bit. All right. So again, if D was blank, else it would go down here and go to the purchasing screen. So now I also have, if F is not blank, I want to execute this bit as well. So you have to understand the combination of if conditions around your OK codes. Now this is the key. Your if conditions around the OK codes as well as the if conditions around the entire set of rows that match that screen. So you want to make sure you're telling SAP where to go. That's the OK code part. But then you want to make sure you're telling Winshuttle what lines it should be expecting to go to next. Because what you don't want to do is send SAP to a particular screen and then tell Winshuttle to be expecting a different screen. So that's why we have the ifs around those to correspond to the ifs around the OK codes. All right, so it makes the script a little bit more complicated.
This is a good way to maybe address the question. Oh, sorry. Lance, there is a question. Elisa has her hand raised. Maybe you can open up the mic.
Sure, I'll go ahead and do that. Go ahead, Elisa.
Oh, I was just going to say this would be a really good script. Could you share it with us afterwards so we could analyze what you have actually done with the if statements and everything?
Yeah, so I think that's a good idea. What we're going to be doing with our links, instead of sending them out via email, we'll still do that, but we're also going to put them on our knowledge base within Autotask. So ClearProc has a customer portal that we're going to be storing all of these links on because these are for this year customers only. So we will send you the information on how to get to the Autotask portal for you and help you with your access. Most of you already have access to that portal, and we will tell you where to get the links in the knowledge base, as well as we will post some of these transaction scripts. So that's a great idea, Lisa, and thanks for that. We will post this information along with the links to the knowledge base, and we will send out information on how to get to the knowledge base with a follow-up email that tells you, that the recording is ready. Okay, so thanks again, Elisa, for that.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions out there at this point? We have Elisa again. All right. Elisa, go ahead.
Oh, no.
Nope, still there. Okay, I need
nope,
to.
Sorry.
That's
Let me lower my hand.
Okay. All right. All right, so that's really all we're looking at here. Again, I'll just repeat that the main takeaway is if you're going to use if conditions to help consolidate the number of scripts that you have to manage your OK codes and the if conditions around the screens, because you need to tell SAP where to go and you need to tell Winshuttle what screen to expect next. Okay, so I think I hit that one pretty good. Let's go back to our PowerPoint here to see what other havoc I can cause. All right, so now we're going to look at transaction scripts again. We're going to use skip transaction if empty. All right, so let's take a look at that script. Go exit out of here. And I think I put my script out there. March WEBtips. Okay, skip if empty. All right, so this example, let's take a look at the data sheet and see what we have going on here as well. All right, so in this case, we're using the T code OMD0. Okay, so this T code, I'm really sticking to the MRP controllers, I believe. I think this is the T code that is used to create new MRP controllers or purchasing groups, one of the two, configuration. Okay, so yep, we're sticking with MRP controllers for today. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the OMD0 T code in my SAP session. And let's take a look at what is required. So again, our tip is using the skip transaction if not found. All right, so this is the configuration for MRP controllers. And if I want to create a new entry, I hit New Entry. And then it gives me all the information that I need. So in this case, there's not a lot of required fields. Either they're required and SAP forgot to put that beautiful little check mark in there telling me it's required, or it's not required. So the skip transaction if not empty, what this allows us to do is it allows us to include fields that are required by our business process but not required by SAP. Now normally you would think you'd have those lined up. If your business process requires a field to be required, you want it to be filled in. But maybe for some use cases it's a required field and sometimes it's not, so you don't want to make a required field in SAP. But what the intent of this is to use transaction to help identify or add new required fields that should be provided when using transaction to do this upload. Again, it's when it's using transaction to do the upload, not when you're manually entering into SAP. Okay, so I'm going to exit this T code and we'll walk through this step by step. But you see there's not a lot of required fields in there. But let's say in my case, I want the email address to be a required field. So let me look at the Excel file here and see what I've created. In this Excel file, I have all the information I need except this record. Get rid of that little message there so that doesn't confuse anybody. Except in this one, I have not provided the user address, my main method of communication for this MRP controller. So in my case, the configuration doesn't make the email field required. But for my business process, I do want it required. So let's go ahead and run this script just sort of as is and see what kind of luck we have. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. We'll just use the run now for essence of time here since we're coming to the top of the hour. Okay, so it ran our 2 transactions. You can see it took that little bit of time there to run those 2 transactions. But I had 3 transactions in my data file. So what happened? You can see that I only have results here. Skip this one. So in my business process, like I said, I wanted to make email required, and I didn't want to have to go through all of this manually to filter out my bad records. So I didn't have to go through and reject line items out of here for those people, for those records that didn't have the email address for the folks. So let's take a look at how you would do that within your transaction script. All right, so it's in the mapping section. We're going to take a look at that. I need to find that particular field. Here we have the user key object ID for recipients. You can see on a particular row, I'm going to use a different row specifically for this example. Okay. In that case, that one's not Excel bound. So you can see we have these options: loop column, skip transaction if empty. So that's the key that we're looking at here, or validate by list, and we'll cover that in a different tip another day. But the one we're looking at here is skip transaction if empty. So that's only available if you've mapped it from Excel into SAP, because it's looking at Excel to see if that cell is empty or not. So when I go to this one, which is a fixed value, you can see that that option is not available. But if I go back down to my field in question, you can see I have skip transaction if empty active for that particular one. So because I've activated that feature or that property, Winshuttle will first look at that column and that row. So in this case, this row of data, it's going to look at this object ID for recipient and see if it's blank first before trying to execute that transaction. So in this case, it saw it was blank and said, oh, I'm not going to do this one because it's not providing all the required fields for this transaction script. So it skipped it, all right, and then the log column was blank. So in this case, you didn't allow that bad data to get into your system, even though SAP said that this was not a required field. Your business process said it was. So you come in here, check that box, and unless they provide a value, it's going to skip that record. And then you can easily see, okay, well, these ones were skipped. Well, why? Okay, well, they didn't provide an email address for that particular user. So if I go in there and update this, so I'll put in a new email address, save the data file. All right, so I'm just going to run row 3 here, since that's the only one that wasn't run. And it should run at this time, I hope. Okay, so we have one transaction, and then you can see this time it was run because I provided an email address for that value. Okay, so that was our last tip. Any questions on that tip? All right, so it looks like we're almost out of time here, so 5 minutes left. Got through everything right on time. So let's take a look at our last couple slides here. So because we do have a couple new users, we'll run through this. You know, a lot of you are already on our solution care offering, but for those that aren't, we'll just touch base on this. So Clear Process offers the solution care support system that helps users, you know, get the most out of their software purchase. So when you buy Winshuttle and you pay your maintenance, you get a couple of these items here in the check. You get, you know, if you have production issues, you can call them, they'll help you. If you have installation issues, you can call them, they'll help you. If you need to request new features or update, you can make those things as well. But many of you also have SharePoint. If you're using Central, you have SharePoint. If you're using the Forms product, you have SharePoint. So we have all these other features that we include in our support offering. And how Solution Care works is it's a block hour program. So you sign up for 10 hours a month, 15, 20, however many you need to help have a dedicated, well, not a dedicated person, but a dedicated team of people to help you solve your problems, whether it's you have too many scripts that you need to get through, and you say, Lance, you know, can you help us with creating these 5 transaction scripts? We just have no resources to do that. You know, that can fall under that Solution Care. If you have SharePoint questions, we can help you there as well. So a support team, you can log a ticket through our system that reaches out to our support team, and we'll get back to you, you know, within a pretty quick fashion to help you with any of these types of options. So, you know, I'll just leave it at that with Solution Care since most of you are already on that, but just to alert those for the new folks. And the last thing here, we have a couple other events coming up. Lean Utopia, I believe, is coming up this summer. Lean Utopia is a Clear Process user group for process optimization. A lot of the users are using Winshuttle, so it's a great opportunity to talk with other folks in the Ohio area to talk about Winshuttle, as well as folks that aren't. It's really just to talk about process optimization as a whole. And our next WEBtips is going to be Justin on April 16th. So next month he's going to be doing forms and workflow options, so keep a lookout for those topics as well. All right, so looks like we have, thought we had a question, but maybe it's just the webinar playing tricks on me with the hand. So are there any questions at this time as we wrap up here in our last 3 minutes? All right, well, thanks everyone for joining our March edition. I'm glad we actually got through it. So that's always a good thing when things work. That helps. So again, we recorded this session, and we'll have the link out there, probably by the end of the week, and then we'll let you know about the knowledge base, how to get to those links, as well as some of the collateral. Like Elisa mentioned, it'd be great to share some of these scripts as well. We'll put those out there for you. So, all right, well, thanks everyone for your attention today.
Thanks, Lance.
Yep, Beth?
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
All right, thank you.